What have you learned about your teaching throughout your personal years of experience? Do you take time to look introspectively at what works well for you and why so that you can replicate it? In this episode, Carmen Scoggins, a Spanish teacher in North Carolina, joins me to talk us through her 5 universal truths about teaching. Though our personal experiences and truths may be a little different, hearing how Carmen frames her universal truths provides us an effective framework for articulating our own and the benefits of doing it. So let's jump in. Are you a language teacher looking for some reassurance that what you're doing in the classroom is on the right track? Or maybe you're looking for some ways to teach even more effectively. If you're one or the other or somewhere in between, you've landed in the right place. This is the World Language Classroom Podcast with your host, me, Joshua Cabral. You're about to get tips, tools, and resources so that your students continue to rise in proficiency and communicate with confidence. Let's jump in. Vamos, allons-y. Hello, my friends. Bonjour, mes amis. Hola, mis amigos. Welcome to the World Language Classroom Podcast. I am Joshua Cabral, and I have to start by saying thank you for being here. So thank you so much for being here, for being a teacher listening to a podcast about language teaching. Just one of those many things that makes you incredible. So thank you so very much for that. Our topic today is going to be what we're calling universal truths about teaching. And to talk to us about this today, we have Carmen Scoggins, who is in North Carolina. And as we are framing this idea of universal truths about teaching, I'm really understanding this about experience. What do we learn about experience in the classroom? And that is so much more than something that is just theoretical. Because if you take theory and you put it in the classroom, sometimes it looks really different. So that's really what I am thinking about with a lens on this topic from Carmen Scoggins today is, what does she learn from her experience and how can she help you to look at your own teaching in the same way? So Carmen is a Spanish teacher in North Carolina, as I mentioned, and she is starting her 31st year as a Spanish teacher. So shout out to longevity in the teaching career. That is amazing. She's also an adjunct professor at Appalachian State University. She's also alum of that university. And she is a past president of FLANC, which is her state language association in North Carolina. So shout out to state language associations. She's also the past president of SCOLT, which is her regional association. So she is a real champion of language associations. She has also been the teacher of the year for her state, as well as for SCOLT, which means that she went on to ACTFL as a candidate for teacher of the year. And also with ACTFL, she leads the Digital Learning Lounge. So if you've been at ACTFL and you've been in experience with that and bringing some tech resources to teachers, she is involved in that as well. So Carmen has a ton of experience. And so we have the pleasure of learning her universal truths that she has learned from all of this experience. So Carmen Scoggins, welcome to the World Language Classroom Podcast.
Well, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. I love talking about things that have sustained me in the classroom for nearly 31 years. And so hopefully I'll have some wise words for all you world language teachers out there. So thank you.
Excellent. Wonderful. So let's just jump right in and talk about what we mean when we say a universal truth. So what does that mean to you?
Well, in general terms, it just means things that are widely accepted, truths that are widely accepted and practiced by the majority of people that kind of unite us into one humanity, like things like be kind to one another, respect one another. And they could be a lot deeper than that. But in terms of world languages, obviously, I'm going to share some of my thoughts. Again, like you mentioned, it's all based on my 30 years of experience in the classroom. So it's just the stuff that comes with experience. And like you said, sometimes you can't be taught it. You just have to live it.
Right. Okay. Absolutely. That's wonderful. And I just wanted to ask, you're an adjunct instructor at Appalachian State. What do you teach there?
Appalachian, that's what we say.
Appalachian. See, oh my gosh. See, I'm such a New Englander. I'm such a New Englander.
You are, but we are very used to it. So At Appalachian State, I taught Spanish for a long time. This is my 22nd year adjuncting there. I guess I don't feel like I have enough to do during the day teaching Spanish. I have to run over there in the afternoons. But for about 10 years now, I've been teaching the methodology class for future language teachers,
Hmm.
which is just, again, my biggest passion about giving back and how do we bring in new teachers into the profession. So that's what I
Hmm.
teach
Hmm. And do you bring up these universal truths we'll be talking
there.
about with your students in that program?
I do. I bring up the world readiness standards, the six core practices, my universal truths, and how they can wrap their heads around what they're getting into.
Okay, excellent. Wonderful. So I think that your framework for this is going to be five universal truths
Correct.
that we can share, and we're going to look at what they are, why they are, how teachers can implement them in their classrooms. So we'll just kind of go through one by one and have a conversation about them.
Last year, my 30th year, I did a session at the Foreign Language Association of North Carolina conference called El Camino de Carmen. I've never walked the
Hmm.
Camino, but I wanted to do a session that reflected 30 years of my journey. And that's how these universal truths came to be. And I
Okay.
didn't just haphazardly choose them, I actually modeled them after the five world readiness standards. So,
Hmm.
communications, cultures, connections, comparisons, and communities. So, what I did was I started thinking, what what has sustained me, what has pushed me forward, what has been my most reflective thought process in 30 years. And so the C's that came out, and I'll just quickly run them,
Hmm.
they're all C's. They
Hmm.
are, and they're all verbs.
Hmm.
Champion, as in to champion someone,
Hmm.
create, cultivate, contribute, and contemplate.
So I have them.
Yes,
So champion, create, cultivate, contribute, contemplate. Okay. All
correct.
right.
And for me, the way this works is these are my universal truths. Okay. This is
Hmm.
what has sustained me. The great thing about choosing your own is that they can be personal and they
Hmm.
should be what brings you joy or things that you think about before you go in the classroom or anytime during the
Hmm.
day. When we go to our schools and, our administration, they're always like, don't forget your why and what is your
Hmm.
why and everything. We understand why we do what we do. So I'm asking you to think about these universal truths from the lens of why we do it, what we do, but also how. How does that look in the classroom?
So before we jump into them specifically, you had mentioned that they're based on the world readiness standards.
Correct.
And as we go through these, perhaps it'll make itself known, but are you seeing these specific to world language teachers, or are these topics where somebody could share this episode with a history teacher?
These universal truths are just powerful for being in the classroom in general or
Hmm.
just for life. What
Hmm.
I do a lot in my own reflective practice is to think about how this is going to translate into the classroom for my students and myself, but also how does this look in my own life?
I'm hungry to learn
Okay.
about these now.
Okay.
So
All right.
let's start. Are they in any particular order that you
There,
put them in this way, or
at least the first one and the last one
okay?
are on purpose.
Okay, let's start with champion.
Champion. I start with this one because the crux of everything I do is for my students, right?
Hmm.
And we know that the most important thing we do in the classroom isn't really to teach the world language that we teach, but to build a relationship with another human being. And without those relationships, they're not going to want to learn from me. They aren't going to want to be a part of what I'm trying to share with them. So I say champion in the fact that that is our why. That is why we get up and do what we do every single day. We 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 teach them so much more than world languages, though. We teach them life skills, we give them shared experiences, and we just remind them that we are all part of something bigger. So
Hmm.
that's my first thing, is the student. And then how we do that is by getting to know them. Hello, it's the first thing we need to
Hmm.
do. We need to find out what their interests are, and we need to champion their strengths and their weaknesses because we know that they can all bring something to the classroom. We need
Hmm.
to foster that growth mindset for them. Learning a language is tricky, it's different than doing any other thing at school. So we need to give them that belief that they can improve, be real and authentic, and students just want to experience the language in real contexts.
Hmm.
So that's kind of how I start, is always with the students.
So let me ask you now, you've been doing this for 31 years, and we have this idea of this championing our students and getting to know them. So, what would you recommend, or what have you done personally when you have a student who has more of a wall or a barrier to getting to know them? How can we still engage?
It goes back to just having a simple conversation with a student. It does happen, of course, every time, I try to be, like Professor Keating on Dead Poet Society. I want everyone to say, oh, Captain, my Captain. And that is just not going to happen. So I try to make that student who has that wall up feel special, and talk to them about what's important to them over and over and over again. I just don't let go of it. I
Hmm.
make sure I walk around the room each day and have individual conversations with students, whether in the target language or just in English, and just so they feel like they have a safe space in my classroom. And
Hmm.
before you know it, I've always noticed that the walls start to come down.
Hmm. Yes, through practice.
Yeah.
That's
And
wonderful.
and
No, great.
caring. I mean,
Hmm.
heaven forbid.
Right.
Right.
Yes, I was at a conference last week and we were talking about a book called One Trusted Adult.
Mm.
And like, if you could be that one trusted adult, like how much of a relationship and how empowering that is for a student. So it's a book I recommend to people called
Oh,
One
lovely.
Trusted
I'll check
Adult.
that out
Yeah.
for sure.
Hmm.
It's like Rita Pearson's Every Child Needs a Champion, her TED Talk, that
Hmm.
there are those students who are going to try to dissolve into the floor or the background of our
Hmm.
classrooms, and we can't let that happen. We're
Right.
there to build
Absolutely.
those relationships and to help our students feel part of something.
Excellent. So champion number one,
Champion is
champion those
always number
students.
one. Okay.
Okay.
Next, universal truth is create. And the why is we teach because it's our passion. And we want to offer shared experiences embedded with cultural nuances for our students. We use the three modes of communication. And again, I always say that the world language classroom is the absolute best place for every student to learn, because we differentiate just from the nature of what we do. We are speaking, we're listening, we're drawing, we're acting, we're doing all the things, and everyone can find something that they can connect to, hopefully in our
Hmm.
classrooms. And we can't just do that by, hoping it's going to happen, obviously, but we've got to make sure students know how to learn a language. Coming from a math class or social studies class or English or whatever that they come from, they've been in those classes most of their lives probably, but maybe
Hmm.
if they're a first time language student in a high school classroom, it means they're 14 or 15, they've never taken a language before. So I try to
Hmm.
relate it to something that they had to learn how to do. Now we're in the Appalachian Mountains, we have ski slopes, so most of my students are skiers or snowboarders. So I'm like, what does it mean to be a novice skier? What does it mean to be
Hmm.
an intermediate skier? And they're like, oh yeah, I fell a lot, I made a lot of mistakes, etc. And then I got better after practice and practice. And I'm like, there you go. That's how you're going to
Hmm.
learn a world language. I teach them the lingo. They know what proficiency means. I never use the word test. I call them an assessment. We use the world readiness standards, the six core practices. So just using the actual language that you want the students
Hmm.
to understand helps tremendously when we talk about just how we're going to learn, first of all, but then when we go into the actual content, they know that this is what's expected of them.
Right. So I'm already seeing the links between them. So with the first one with champion, with doing that, you're getting to know your students really well. And by knowing them, then you are creating content based on knowing them. So I'm starting to see the connection as they go through already. Right.
Perfect. So maybe these were in a specific order.
Yeah, it's just I'm a very linear
It
thinker,
took
so
your
I'm like,
brain to help me.
of course, I'm going to start there, and then that's going to
Yes.
allow for
Okay.
this, right? Because how
Yes.
can you
Right.
create topics of interest to them if you don't know them? So clearly, you're going to start with that one,
Exactly.
right?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, so next up.
Okay. So next up is cultivate. And the why is we learn and teach because the teacher, we are lifelong learners, and we are modeling that for our students. Sometimes I think students just would rather be anywhere else in the world other than the school. And I'm trying to show them that this is a place that brings me joy, and that that there are many worse places they can be in the world. And so we need to be in this moment together. So as the teacher, though, so now we're moving to the teacher perspective a little bit.
Mhm.
You need to go to conferences. There are tons of free opportunities during the summer, during the year. Try to access professional development when you can, even if it's locally, if it's at your school, your district, or your state. Perhaps read about your content. There are many great resources out there for you to stay fresh. You just need to stay informed. It's when we begin to do things the same way year after year that we begin to stagnate. So challenge yourself, read, learn something new about the content area that you teach. If you haven't, maybe consider doing your national board certification. That reflective, all the stuff that you do in the classroom it seems overwhelming at the time, but it's very important for you to consider staying fresh in that way. And so that would be a nice challenge for you. But just continue to cultivate in any way you can that joy that sent you into the classroom in the first
Mhm.
place, whether it's meeting somebody new at a conference or learning something about AI that you didn't know, or
Mhm.
best practices or technology, whatever that interests you.
I think when teachers are doing a lot of PD or listening to a podcast about language teaching,
Go
there's
figure.
always it's another thing. So if something new goes in, something has to go out, right? Because like, how can you just constantly be adding on, adding on? They're
Right.
excited about doing new
Right.
things. So that's wonderful. I always look at it as how can you do small tweaks to what you're doing well already? Because I also do not like this deficit model of teaching
Right.
in terms of I go to PD because I'm not doing something well. You
Right.
go to PD so that
No.
you can be reassured that 80%
Yes.
is awesome that you're doing, and then you can do
Absolutely.
those little things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean,
Mhm.
that's another thing. When you go to a lot of PD and you watch all these people and it seems to come so naturally to them. I present all the time. Just because I have a big mouth, I have a lot to
Mhm.
say, but it's not that. It's that you go to these sessions to, like you said, reaffirm that yes, I'm doing
Mhm.
this in the right way, or why don't I think of trying this? But it doesn't mean you don't have the skills. It's just a
Mhm.
way to reassure what you're doing in the classroom every day and possibly to learn a new way to do something.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Ah.
Okay, moving on.
Okay, so we have done champion,
Mhm.
create, cultivate, and now contribute. And this again is from the teacher's point of view, sort of. Why should we contribute? The why is we give back because we received. Okay. I am a big proponent of the African saying Ubuntu. If you're familiar with that, it means
Mhm.
I am because we are.
Mhm.
And I know that I'm not here in isolation. I am part of something much bigger and have a responsibility to contribute because someone gave to me and
Mhm.
someone brought me to where I am today. And that is why I'm so passionate about giving back. So, what does this look like? Maybe just get involved a little bit more at your school level. Maybe
Mhm.
serve on a committee that you hadn't thought about serving on, or sponsoring a club, or volunteering. At my school, we have a big saying that these aren't your students or my students, these are our students. So sometimes it's
Mhm.
nice to get to know students in your building that you don't actually teach, but that
Mhm.
you can still help be there for, right? So maybe sponsoring a club that you would never think to sponsor, like me, the chess club, for example,
Mhm.
or take it to the next level, present, or even start small, at a professional learning community, share an idea, collaborate, build something with someone, whether they're from your school or not.
I'm also going to use this as a quick moment as a just reminder to our listeners that in terms of contributing, you likely have a state language association or
Yes.
regional language association, and you're doing great stuff in your classroom, and you can share that out in a session. So look for when your conferences and events come up, and you can definitely contribute that way. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, just that if you think I have nothing to say, I have nothing, of course you do. That's what you do every single day is some kind of teaching practice that you have no one has thought about, I promise. And
Hmm.
so get out there, put a few ideas together, let Canva make you
Hmm.
a beautiful presentation,
Hmm.
and go do your thing, because it's exactly what teaching is. That's what you're
Hmm.
doing every day.
Yeah. I think a lot of times when teachers go to particularly their state and regional language associations, that they are maybe going for that person who is the expert in the field and showing
Hmm.
some new innovative way of doing something. But we're mostly going to hear what the lens is of a particular teacher in their classroom. So if you are considering this in any way, just remember you don't have to be an expert on anything besides your own experience in your classroom. And that's what we want to learn about.
That's exactly right. I
Right.
literally give, I don't know how many presentations a year. I basically say the same thing. I might put a new metaphor on it, a new spin on it, or whatever. And everyone's like, God, how do you come up with all these ideas? I'm saying the same thing, literally, because I go back to these universal truths. These are the foundation of what I do. None of that's going to change.
Mhm.
And so that's why I can call it something else and still talk about something that I'm really passionate about. So you
Mhm.
can do it.
Yeah.
Do it.
Absolutely. Okay. And then number 5 on the list.
Okay, this is the best for last, in my opinion. Contemplate. And the why is because being reflective is the only way we grow and learn. Okay, John Dewey says you don't learn from experience, you learn from reflecting on experience. And so sometimes we know it's hard. You got to take a look in the mirror and think about what you're doing, why you're doing it. Is it working? Is it not working? And be brave enough to say, I need to go in a different direction, or I'm killing it today, right? Talk things out with, how do you do this? Talk things out with a colleague, or be a guest on a podcast and share your thoughts that way.
Mhm.
Set some goals for yourself and then take time to reflect, readjust, and rethink.
The contemplating, that is such an important thing. This is one of those things that we have that expectation that our students are doing
Right.
that we don't actually do ourselves
Right.
as much, and it's sort of no, do as I say, not as
Right.
as I do, and it's so that contemplation part is so important there. So could you do a quick
Yeah.
rundown of what those 5
Sure.
were again? Yeah.
Okay. Champion is get to know your students, build those relationships. Create is definitely thinking about best practices, 6 core practices, world readiness standards to plan things and to create shared experiences. Cultivate is sustaining that content that you love by reading, attending professional development. Contribute, give back to the profession any way you can, maybe locally, at your school level, or state, or regionally, or nationally. And
Mhm.
then contemplate, take that selfie and turn it
Mhm.
back around and look at what you're doing in the classroom and who you are. And that's it.
All
5
right.
universal truths.
Excellent. Wonderful. And I would like to hear your thoughts on teachers that are listening and they sound simple. I can do this starting tomorrow, right? And we
Sure.
all know that those are best of intentions, but where could be a starting point for a teacher to sort of jump in and to start putting these into practice in their classroom?
Well, Dr. Maya Angelou says that every journey begins with a single step. So, what I suggest is that you take a minute, start with that last C of contemplate, and figure out what your universal truths would be. What really sustained you? What has made you the teacher that you are? Even if you think about a person and that brought you to where you are today, why was that person so important? So choose something. It could be something about your teaching practices, it could be something about students, just something that as you start the school year out fresh, that you want to do, you want to be more mindful of, and then start with that single step and see where it takes you.
These are they're theoretical yet really concrete. You were able to take them into your classroom. And as we started, and I said, here are these universal truths, but they're really based on your personal experience. And it's because you're talking from that position of experience with them that they make them so actionable and applicable to our classroom. So thank you very much
Of
for
course,
putting that
yes. Yeah,
lens.
these didn't come to me overnight. It's
Mm.
a true reflection of 30 years of where have I come, where do I want to go, how have I changed and grown in the middle.
Right. I'm even thinking about, okay, so outside of my classroom and just my life, where am I
Right?
championing people in my life,
Exactly.
or so
Right.
all of that.
That's right. That's right.
So, are there any recommendations that you can give to our listeners in terms of moving forward with this, learning more, people, places, anything like that?
Speaking of champion, just attend your state conference if nothing else. That is a great place to start. You can begin to network with people. You never know what's going to happen I mean, my
Hmm.
best years, I grew up at Flank. That's what I always say. I've been going to
Hmm.
Flank since I first started teaching and was president at a very young age when I didn't know how to be president of anything. But I came into my own teacher leadership there. So you never know what's going to happen right around the corner. If you could attend a regional conference, because it's going to bring in a lot more people from other places that you can't meet in your own state. Or if nothing else, search out wonderful podcasts like Joshua's podcast or other podcasts that are out there, YouTube videos, anything that is free if you can't go to a world language
Hmm.
conference. But I suggest starting at a conference. There's nothing like it.
Right. I particularly focus on the state level
Yes.
because if you haven't been to a state conference, then it's the place to start for me because the states have their own standards.
Yes.
Your state has a pretty much a similar demographic. Maybe you're more rural and there are more urban areas or things like that, but you can connect with teachers that are outside of your building and your department, but who have a similar objective because of the demographics and standards that you have. And once you're comfortable with that, then moving on to the regional and the national. But to
Right.
start at the national level,
Right.
where you're from New Hampshire and it's somebody from Washington State, you have possibly a very different
Right.
demographic and standards. So that's why I like to champion the state. It's more grassroots,
It
you know.
is, and it's again, it's your closest connection to people, and that way, when you meet somebody, then you can definitely keep in touch and keep talking this through. The bigger out you go, the harder it is to
Mhm,
do that,
mhm.
just because you don't have the same experiences. Yeah.
Yes. And so, how can teachers be connecting with you? You're doing a lot of work out there with teachers, and I'm sure they're going to want to learn more from you. So, how
Right.
can we be connecting with you?
Well, you can reach me by email, just my first and last name at Gmail, Scoggins at gmail.com. You can find me on X. I'll never get used to saying that. You can find me on the Twitter at Carmen Scoggins. I am on Facebook too. You can find me that way. So just feel free. I love to talk. I love to talk about ideas. And if you just have something you want to run past me, I am happy to listen. Sometimes that's what we need to remember to do instead of talking is just listen.
Right. And I'll make sure those are all in the
Perfect.
show notes, along with your website. I'll
Perfect.
also make sure
Okay.
that your blog is
Thank you.
linked in the
Okay.
show notes as well. Okay, Carbon Scoggins, we are just about at the end here. So I always like to leave our listeners with a hearty piece of advice. It can be about your universal truth, life, teaching, anything you would like. What's some advice you can leave us with?
I challenge you to do some inward reflecting. I think of all the things I mentioned, that is what I lean on the most, that helps move me forward the most. So reflect, identify what your truths are, and don't just think about the why, but also the what and the how it
Mhm.
all fits together. But in doing so, stay true to who you are. Don't worry about everyone else. And remember that your students are counting on you and that we are here to remind them that we are more alike than we are unalike.
Find out how it all fits together.
Right,
That's
right.
my takeaway from that whole thing.
Okay, okay.
Find
Right.
out how it all fits
Right,
together so
right,
that it's everything's not siloed in different places.
right.
I would like to just say that it has been an absolute joy to talk to you, who
Thank
a person who loves what you do. It is so clear in everything that you say, and it's so inspiring that
you.
you are staying at it after 30 years and you still love your students and you love what you do. And in our current realm of teaching, we don't hear a lot about that right now. And
Right.
I just want this conversation to keep going
Okay.
because I can just feel and hear the joy of teaching that resonates from everything you're saying. So thank you so much for bringing that
Thank
to us
you.
today.
Wow, that's the best compliment I've ever gotten, because I believe that whatever I put out into the world should be positive and just awesome. Because if it's not, then I'm not who I'm not putting out who I really am, because that's the kind of person I am. I want to bring people joy. I try to see the good in everything, and I absolutely do love what I do. So thank you for recognizing that.
Okay, absolutely. Well, listeners, every Monday morning on your way into school, throw this podcast on, this particular episode, so that you can bring your joy with you. What are your takeaways from that conversation with Carmen Scoggins? What are your universal truths around teaching? Do they align with anything that Carmen shared? Be sure to check out the show notes to connect with Carmen Scoggins. You'll also see the link to sign up for Talking Points, my weekly email newsletter with tips and resources for language teaching. There are also links to get in touch with me if you'd like to work together, and we can do that in person in your school or remotely. I will talk to you soon. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to the World Language Classroom podcast. Be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so that you never miss an episode. Let's keep the conversation going on social media. Connect with me on X, aka Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at WL Classroom. And for even more valuable resources, visit my website, WLClassroom.com, where you'll find over 300 blog posts about language teaching. So stay inspired, keep growing, and continue making a difference in your language classroom.